Um, I would like you, Pam, to start with some comments for Alex. But before you do, Alex, will you please set up the story a little bit for Nick? Well, let's do the MCS and then a story setup, if you will.
Okay. So Niccolo Amati is a 17th century violin maker. His family invented the instrument. His grandfather essentially invented the instrument, and his dad took it on from there, and now he's the third generation. And he grows up as the apprentice to his dad, who's a bit overbearing and doesn't really believe in him. And Niccolo spends much of his sort of early adulthood trying to find ways to believe in himself. Then in his 30s, the plague comes along and kills his entire family. And he's left all alone. They loot the shop, and he's left with nothing. He discovers that his half-sister is still alive, Betta, and with her, he rebuilds his life over the next 10 years or so. Takes on apprentices, including Guarneri and eventually Stradivari, and builds the grand pattern violin, which is the one that we know to this day, and gets married, has a bunch of kids. Most of them die before he does, and as he's dying, he hears Stradivari playing one of his new instruments, and Niccolo dies realizing that he did what he needed to. He advanced the family legacy and created and improved the violin. But his apprentices are already beginning to surpass him, and that's how he dies. So this chapter is a moment when and I kind of left some of this out because I knew this would go into this chapter. This is the chapter only a couple years before the plague hits, and he and his father get this invitation to go see Monteverdi's opera, the Orfeo, which was essentially the first opera ever. Monteverdi's sort of the most famous composer of the day, and he was from Cremona, which is the town all these people are from. So they go to the castle in the city, well, just outside the city, and go to listen to Monteverdi to conduct this opera. And this is kind of the moment where a bunch of things come together. Monteverdi was the one who Niccolo had met like 15 years earlier and asked, can the violin be a bigger presence? Can it become a solo instrument in music? Because the old style of music where everybody played basically the same melody over and over again is dead at this point, and we're looking for, like Monteverdi and others, we're looking for an instrument to become the solo, and the violin seems like it should be the one, so he does that. And his quest through this moment is to make the violin a solo instrument by making it louder somehow. But he can't figure out how, and his dad keeps on telling him, like, look, no, it's not, like, it's purposeless, and he has 100 different reasons why he doesn't think it's a good idea. So Niccolo's sort of like never been able to do it. And this is the moment when his dad and he actually hear Monteverdi conducting their instruments. And first Niccolo from point of view, and then his dad realize why or how the violin isn't quite doing the job it needs to be doing. And yes, that it needs to become, it needs a change. It needs some alterations. So this is the chapter where his dad finally sort of comes around to thinking, okay, fine, like, I'll, go ahead and make these changes, do your little experiments. He still doesn't really sort of believe in it, but he, at that point lets Niccolo go ahead and make the alterations that he needs to. So anyway, it's not a great.
Remind us when Niccolo became an apprentice, his age, how long he's been an apprentice, his age now.
He became an apprentice when he was 12, and he's 30 in this chapter.
Okay. All right. Great. Pam, I'd love your thoughts.
This is a great chapter, especially in moving the plot forward, because we see, this is the first time I've really seen Niccolo and Girolamo come together, where they're sharing something, where it's not him and the violin in this, for lack of a better word, studio, being yelled at by his dad. This is where there are two men going to this opera. And I think that the ending it's everything Niccolo's been waiting for. And I was glad Celeste asked that question about the age, because it struck me. I'm like, 15 years he's waited for this. I'm waiting for something from Niccolo to acknowledge that. I think for me, most of my comments for this chapter were places where I felt we were missing some emotion from Niccolo. As much as this is a story of the Amati violin and the historical piece connecting that, it's the story of Niccolo. And so I think there are some places where we want to have a little bit more insight into, is his frustration building? Is his anger building? He's been waiting 15 years. You have glimpses of that where when Monteverde comes in, and it sort of somehow at that moment inspires him to ask his dad to revisit the question of him practicing, and he tells him, shut up, watch the opera. And then, so you have pieces of that coming through, but there are a few places where I think you can insert a little bit more to pull that reader into Niccolo's head, to make us feel like, oh my gosh, when is this ever going to get better for him? So I'll just go through those quickly, because other than that, the rest of there's nothing as far as the structure I don't think that needs changing. A few places where I got stuck with the time jumps, and I'll just point those out when I get there. Okay, so I think my first comment comes on page 2. The third paragraph, Niccolo says, I can guide you, suppressing the anger he's been feeling recently. And I'm just wondering, is that feeling of anger and the motivation for it introduced in earlier chapters, so that when he says it here, as a reader, I know that I can feel that anger building? Or is this new? Because at this point, we want to feel like we're following Niccolo's emotional arc. And I'm not sure that I've seen his anger suppressing, but it could be in earlier chapters and I've forgotten. So we just want to make sure that we're seeing his anger build, or his frustration build, so that it supports this statement here. After the letter, which I thought was great, and the one thing I wondered, when he asks his father if the letter is safe in his pouch, because he wants to make sure that the soldiers know that they are allowed to be on the castle grounds, I wondered if I should know that closer at the beginning when he's worrying about stray bullets, because I found myself going, why does he think someone's going to shoot him? They're all dressed up and coming to some event. So I didn't put those two connected, that he shouldn't be on the castle grounds without that invitation. So I don't know if that's a disconnect only for me, and it might be. So at the bottom of, I'm in the middle of page 3. Niccolo talks about it. The apprenticeship continued to the point that Niccolo wondered if he had become a punishment for daring to suggest improvements. And I just wonder, what do these delays do to Niccolo's relationship with his father? Does he resent him more? Does he grow more frustrated? Does he even grow a little arrogant, wondering if he can do better than Girolamo? Because Monteverde has already been there and they've already had that conversation. How does that impact Niccolo as time goes on? And then you have the next paragraph starts with, it's not until he was 27 years old, 15 years after tapping on trees, that he was finally allowed to make a violin. And again, I ask, does he have any frustration about that long wait? This is another place to show how Niccolo's emotions and how his relationship with his father is changing over time. You know, as a young boy, I think when he was 12, he was hanging on every word his dad said, and he was seeking that praise that he wanted so much. And when dad finally said, you're not as dumb a kid as I thought you were, it was like a backhanded compliment, but he's moving past that because now he's 27. So during that interim, what has happened to that long wait? What has that done for him? At the top of 4, when he says the older he got, the more he recognized his father was incapable of understanding anyone else's perspective. That stopped me in a good way. As I said, this is an important point to show readers how the delay affected Niccolo. Did he wait patiently? Was he waiting with growing frustration? And I kept wondering, does he practice in secret? Does he take advantage of any times to try to persuade his father? It just seems like at this point, I just think he's going through the motions every day of whatever his dad tells him to do without any concern that he's not getting to do what he really wants to do. I'm not feeling that he's annoyed with it. 2 more paragraphs down, the one that starts with, that was the moment Niccolo began to realize he might need to wait until his father died. He continues to work with his head down during the planing and the carving and the scraping, saying nothing to contradict his father and trying to forget his dream. And I just said, why? Is there any internal conflict with that? Is he doing that, but his anger is seething? I just wasn't sure. Then you jump, the next paragraph says when a few weeks earlier, the letter of invitation had arrived, suddenly this unleashes Niccolo's desire to improve the violin again. And at that point, I stopped a little bit. I was a little confused with the time jumps because we begin with the present, heading toward the concert where Niccolo's an adult. Then we go back to the previous 15 years when he wasn't allowed to make the violin that he wanted to make, up to age 27. Then it's 1624, which is 3 years before now, and I'm having trouble keeping Niccolo's state of mind connected with these jumps. And again, mostly what I'm wondering is, how is his desire to make that violin, his fear of his father, or his desire to please his father? How is that all battling, with each other? Is there any time of quiet seething that any of this happens? At the top of the next page, I see that when he says he feels split between the excitement at possibilities and terror that his father would crush the opportunity. I said, yes, nice. This is when readers feel Niccolo's anticipation for this concert. So that's where, as a reader, I'm becoming more drawn into it. I'm sitting with Niccolo as opposed to just reading a story about what happened then. I love that you pull readers in when you do those little bits. And then I don't have anything again. I think on page 8, when he stands, they've had the conversation. He's watched his dad in conversation with those members of the guild, which was fascinating. And I loved how Niccolo notices he's very different. And he says, maybe there's things going on in that guild that I had no awareness of. And that the last paragraph on 8, I wondered why it dawned on Niccolo at that point that he says it was strange that a father would prevent his son from attempting new work. why did that dawn on him there? I know that he had just spoken with Monteverde, and he had mentioned in earlier chapters that he wished Monteverde was his father. But unless Monteverde says something praiseworthy to Niccolo, I don't know why he suddenly thought about that father-son dynamic at that point by just looking at Monteverde and watching Girolamo talk with the other men in the guild. And let's see, I think that is the last place is on page 12 when we're waiting for the violins. That, to me, it still sticks in my mind, Alex, when I stopped reading this. The metaphor you created about the violin, the walls and the house and the roof. I mean, I read this piece the first time, I don't know, 5 days ago, and then I reread it again, but that stuck with me. It raised my anticipation of hoping that the violins really come through. And I'm thinking Niccolo has got to be anticipating hearing the Amati violins. And I'm wondering, when he hears the notes and he says in the top of 12, Monteverde seemed to be pushing the instrument beyond its capabilities, does Niccolo wonder at that point, I could have made a difference in this violin had I been given an opportunity? I'm wondering if a little internal confidence is going on inside of him. And then when we get to the end and he finally gets what he's wanted, sort of, because then of course Dad says, don't use our best wood. I wonder what's his reaction. I wanted a reaction from Niccolo here when Dad finally said, you can do it. So I think that's the only piece for me missing in this chapter, is a little bit of emotion that would draw Niccolo's growing frustration. And it almost comes to fulfillment when he hears the violins and realizes the violins have been overshadowed. And he says, but if I would have been allowed, in my head, if I would have been allowed to make that violin, this wouldn't have happened. I'm just making that up. But I don't know, but I want to know. I want to know via you. And as you write, what he's thinking. But again, as usual, a chapter that really sucks readers in and you can't not read it.
Great comments, Pam. Thank you so much. Melanie, what were your thoughts on this?
Let's see. Very nice as always. I love the description, particularly in this chapter, and all the things. I have some different comments to share. So the opening of the chapter was a little confusing to me, a little disorienting, because I thought they were in a battle scene. And then I thought, well, maybe it's not a battle scene. Maybe it's like an active military training ground, but then that was confusing. And then when they finally got to the gate, I thought, okay, they're being led into the castle, but I still don't understand why people are shooting cannons and rifles. I'm not sure I really understand what that is they were walking through. And it seems a little treacherous for civilians to be tramping through there. I also suck at history, so you got to take that into account. On page 2, maybe Pam referred to this, his anger, the anger that Niccolo was feeling, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that anger is, because I think there's enough of a time jump that we don't know what that anger is. So some clues regarding that. At the top of page 3, so when we learn about, his dad didn't want him working on the violin, the thing that came to my mind was the precedent we'd already seen of him working on a scroll in secret when he was young, even though his dad told him, don't work on a scroll, and he did it anyway. So I was thinking there's a precedent there for him to be maybe working on a new violin design in secret. It was it felt inconsistent with his character arc for him to just set that aside for 15 years. So I felt like in some way, shape, or form, even if he was thinking about it or drawing something, that he should be doing something in that direction, or understand why, other than just dad doesn't want me to. I really appreciate the context you provide about, you know, how long someone should be an apprentice, because that's something that I don't know. So that was really helpful to have that context. On the top of page 4, I was assuming the dad has to present the violin to the guild for him to be admitted, but that wasn't completely clear to me in the sentence. Let's see. On page 5, there's a reference to Spanish uniforms. Again, I'm bad with history. I'm not sure why there's Spanish uniforms there. May not be super important to the story, but I was just like, what's going on? Then I'm going to jump forward to page 9. So when we get this little side story about the dad, you know, Niccolo thinks his dad's ill, and then he references his brother. That story felt a little like tacked on top and not really integrated into the story. And it kind of, to me, felt like it came out of nowhere and didn't really go anywhere beyond that. So I think if you keep it, maybe integrate it a little more into the story. I love that, just from a technical standpoint, Niccolo's insight on how to make a violin better by taking away the frets, right? Is that the thing? That's the improvement, or one of the improvements. Let's see. And then on page 13, towards the top of the page, we're thinking about the instrument being a solo instrument. The question was how, and then the next paragraph starts walking home. And I thought there needed to be a little more of a transition there that felt a little abrupt. And my ending is going to be a little abrupt. One last comment.
No, don't worry about that. Just keep going.
I only had one more comment. And it's just a general comment, which might be annoying, is that this chapter is the only chapter of yours that I've read where I felt like it was too long. And I'm not sure that I can pinpoint a specific section where I felt like it was long, but it did feel like it was too long. And I don't know if that's breaking it up into different chapters or if it's condensing that. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. Thank you, Melanie. Nick.
Sure. Yeah, so I really like both y'all's comments. I think I have things to say about each of them. Specifically, Pamela. So I think you pointed out, I didn't mention what you talked about in my comments necessarily, but you really kind of highlighted what I felt kind of was missing in this chapter, but just couldn't really, I just didn't pinpoint it. Because, so I remember the last opera chapter, Alex, I read, and I thought this one was far and away much better than the last one. Like, the last one was good, but this one was much more immersive with the setting, the plot, like the dialogues. It really kind of drew me in every way. But I do think, as far as the character goes, you know, we don't have to hit it again. But I think you could push Niccolo's character to his limits a lot more, just in like the potential you had to show like his anger and like these 15 years and everything. Because I mean, he is 30. I just think he would at this point be a little more, even as like passive and soft to the guy as he is, which I love that about him. I don't think that should change. I think we would see that coming out. I also, again, Donia said again, I thought they were in a battle. I picked up pretty quickly that they weren't, that they were just, you know, drilling outside the castle when I read it again, but I did have to read it again. Also, I'm cheating here a little bit, but I really like the contrast between all the extravagance here and the plague that's coming up in a couple chapters, I would assume at this point. I mean, I think it's really going to make that plague just seem so much more devastating, just having shown all this. And then just another thing about contrast. I really like the contrast. I'm not sure if you meant to do this, but you spend so much time talking about how impressive the castle is and all these amazing descriptions about the castle. And I just really like kind of showing Nicolo's like aging father against that. Like, I don't know, for some reason it really struck me because we spent all this time about the castle, and then I'm imagining, you know, this old man kind of, you know, I'm shambling across this giant drawbridge, and that kind of struck me. And I mean, with that, I think like shortly after that description, you say that Nicolo softened in his anger, like you say that, but I think you could show Nicolo seeing his, like, describe a little more his old father kind of moving across this bridge, and then just kind of Nicolo, you show him softening just saying that. And then I think it kind of weaves it in and keeps you from just having to tell, and also really hits on that contrast. I can see that comment that it was a little long. I really like seeing more of Nicolo's thoughts and desires compared to past chapters. But I think some of the background could be cut down and consolidated, probably. I think that would kind of help the length issue. And similarly, like I think kind of like how I think you could weave the anger in by him seeing his father. I think you could also just kind of weave in all the God. I'm
He
sorry.
needs to go out. He wants to go
Get
out.
out of here. Come on.
We stopped for dog.
He's been
Oh,
staring at me because he's wondering why we haven't walked yet. So I don't know if you see him in the background. I'm sorry about that.
No, he's horrible. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah, so I think in general, like I kind of notice, I really love everything you have in the chapter, but a lot of it is kind of like you spend this block on the castle descriptions, and then like this block on like background, and then like this block on action dialogue, this block background. I think you could kind of just find ways to weave all that in a lot more, and I think you could kind of hit two things at the same time with a single sentence, or I don't know. I think that would solve the length, and then also just make it a little more impactful. And just small comment, I wonder if a guy as famous and big as Monteverde would remember the conversation with Nicolo 15 years ago. Or I could definitely see him remembering it, but I don't know if he would remember it and then gesture about it so quickly. Just as he sees him, like, oh, why haven't you answered my question from 15 years ago? There's a way to do it, I think, just maybe a little differently. And then we kind of talked about that. I think at the end you had extremely beautiful descriptions of the opera. I love how you talk about how the music is a fight. I mean, I thought that was awesome. Like that's such a cool way to describe it, and really show. I haven't fully understood. I've understood, on the surface of how the violin was improved. Made it bigger, a little more powerful. So I've understood like kind of in those technical terms. But this is the first time I actually see what that means. For me, as a guy who doesn't know music or, instruments, like seeing how these violins were getting just completely outdone by everything else, it really showed how important Nicolo's contributions to the instrument were that come later in a way that I hadn't had before. So, and I'll stop there. Perfect. Okay.
Great comments from everybody. Wow. That was really wonderful. And Alex and I have been back and forth with this chapter for the last few weeks. That I had a few thoughts as everyone was talking, Alex. And I think what might be missing is twofold. First of all, I think you need another chapter in between the last chapter and this one. And then I think you might also need an external conflict that prevents him from pursuing his dreams with the violin. In the last chapter, his dad, and of course, this is just suggestion. You can take it or leave it. You know what's best for your story. But something that came to me was that he's starting to become a real raging, mean alcoholic. What if in the next 18 years, it's not 15, it's 18 years, if I'm correct, if my math is not off, he has been taking more and more of the business over until he's running it in all but name. And his dad won't give him that final gratification of not being an apprentice, but a full partner. And that has kept him so busy that he's not physically been able to pursue the dream, because he has to keep his family together. And that is more compelling. It's just a thought, but it might be an interesting way to go with it. And also to make his mom happy. His mom loves the finer things. And his mom has come down in the world a little bit. And he wants to make her happy, and making her happy is keeping that business thriving. Just an idea. We don't have a historical reference to go by, but what if something were taking another dynamic that usurps that need, that desire? It might be helpful. And then putting it into that chapter and oh, okay, well, he's basically running, he is a Mahdi now, but his dad won't give him the credit, and he's a mean drunk, et cetera, et cetera. Something like that. It could be something else entirely, but it was just a thought that occurred to me. I do think that the gap is too big. We know that. We've discussed that. You and I have discussed that. So there needs to be a way to address that tamped down anger. He's had to put it in a box and put it away. But since the last 2 weeks, since getting this invitation, it's been creeping out more and more. Another thing is, if Monteverde is from Cremona, that hadn't really sunk in for me. He would have been back more than once in 18 years. Yes, perhaps? No? Okay. Okay, well, that actually serves you well. I think some of the changes that you made in this chapter, I love the very, very specific details about what's on a tapestry, or what's, these little things, again, make such a big difference in filling things out. But as Nick pointed out, and again, it's so interesting having somebody come in at this sort of stage, sort of with a fresh eye to it, they do feel pieced together. That's because you're trying to juggle a lot in this chapter. Again, another good reason for perhaps putting a chapter or two even in between the Monteverde visit and then this going to see Orfeo. What are your thoughts about that, Alex?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm glad everybody sort of was able to confirm it. 6 pages into a chapter in 1624, so I can cut all the stuff from this chapter about that, where he's actually doing the first attempt at he's doing kind of a first attempt at the improvements, but basically it's his test to end his apprenticeship. That violin, making that, doing it, and then his dad being all like, yeah, you did it. Good for you. Keep going. And he's like, well, take it to the guild. Nah, that's not, you don't need it. I'm already a guild member. Who cares? And yeah, no, I like the ideas about just having his dad just be kind of like, he's kind of just losing it. He's just losing touch with, what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea that Nicola's sort of just been slowly taken over, and and his dad takes him to the brothel. That's the other bit that's been kind of missing, is just stuff about like what's going on with Girolamo in the background. So my idea is that he's not going to guild meetings. I mean, he is sometimes, but he's just going to the brothel.
Oh, wow.
Like he's just, so this is where this chapter is where Nicola realizes like, oh, you've been cheating on mom this whole time. Like that's what's going on. That's, and their relation and their marriage has basically just been terrible, and there's no divorce. I mean, it's the 1600s in Italy,
and that's another reason not to rock the boat.
Yeah, right. And that's why his dad has sort of just been slowly just descending into alcoholism, is that he feels like he's getting older. He feels like his his wife can't have kids anymore because she's too old, and it's just kind of like, well,
What's the point?
what's the point anymore? Yeah, like he's just sort of been like, and Nicola's able to do it, so he's just kind of like, yeah, go ahead, right?
Yeah.
But he
He
doesn't
has
want to let
Nicola
go.
busy and running this. Show how the demands on him, because right now he just feels like he's in limbo, failure to launch. Show that he has tremendous responsibility but no recognition. That would be really interesting.
Right.
And that might very well be true.
Yeah. No, I believe it. Yeah.
So, yeah, and then how can you entwine Antonio into that?
I don't know. I still can't figure that out, right? His uncle. I don't know.
Is it
Every time I
important?
try to put it in, it feels like it's tacked in.
Yeah, is it important, as Melanie just asked? Is it important? And if so, why?
Because of Girolamo. Honestly, it has nothing. Nicola doesn't even matter in his life, but it's Girolamo. The way I've got it is that Antonio, basically, Girolamo kicked his brother out of the workshop before Nicola was born. They had a big fight, and he kicked him out of the workshop. They separated the entire workshop, and Antonio went off and still lived in the town a few houses down, but he never made instruments again. And then he died in 1607, and nobody knows how or why. And I was kind of like, well, I could see him just, his brother kicked him out of the house, and he wasn't, for whatever reason, wasn't either as good a violin maker as Girolamo, or didn't care or something. But he basically he made one or two instruments after that, and they weren't quite as good, so he was kind of the lesser maker. And then eventually killed himself, and so
that guilt is what drives the alcoholism.
Right, and that's why Girolamo's such an asshole. Basically, is because he feels like he killed his brother.
So you've got to introduce it way back, several chapters back.
Right, but every time I do, it feels like it's shoehorned in, right? And I don't know how to do it, and I could drop the entire thing, but
Any thoughts from anyone else about how he can weave them in?
I mean, maybe I could see maybe if there's one of his friends, like if you need it to happen earlier, maybe not here, but if you were trying to show that here, I could see him going and talking to his friends and, being as loose as Niccolo sees him. And, he realizes he's seeing this whole different side of him. And then, I mean, I don't know how you would naturally bring up a guy's brother who killed himself, but maybe if one of these friends kind of more lightly just mentions like, oh, we haven't been to one of these operas since, your brother was around, right? Or just some off comment or something. I don't know. And then I could see that you show the change in the father. Maybe, I don't know if they serve alcohol at operas in the 1600s. Maybe he gets a drink. And then I don't know, but I know it's probably hard to do naturally.
But what if Monteverde said something?
Go ahead, Melanie. Go ahead.
What if Monteverde said something back when the two of them were talking? He could say something like, the future lies in you because Niccolo's brother, we all know what happened there, or whatever.
That's an interesting possibility too.
I was kind of thinking the same thing. Was Antonio a worse violin maker than Girolamo, or vice versa?
No, I think Girolamo is probably better.
And then you could introduce it when Monteverde comes to get the violins and says, I don't know, you far surpassed your brother. I don't know if that would be something. And then you could show the guilt that maybe that gives Girolamo, and that's a launching point. I don't know. But it seems like a natural place to kind of put it in from what I've read so far.
Or maybe Monteverde says something to Niccolo, and Niccolo asks his mom about it because he's afraid to ask his dad. And she fills him in.
It's an interesting point, and it speaks to this whole fraught nature of legacy, because he was a part of that legacy. He got axed. He got booted out of that chain, out of that carrying on of the name, and it killed him. So that legacy was important to the one that, to the brother that got left behind. It devastated him. So what
Right.
does it mean to be a son? What does it mean to be a brother? What does it mean to be a part of a family that created one of the greatest instruments ever,
Right. No, and Girolamo kicked out his own sons too.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a fight with his brother and he kicked him out of the house. Then Roberto and Francesco, his first two sons, they weren't good enough. They just weren't violin makers. So he basically kicks them out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And Niccolo's the only one left, So the third son becomes the apprentice. And it's
And then what is it about giving him that letting him go beyond apprentice that he's worried about, Girolamo's worried about?
I think that he would run away or something, or that he would start his own shop and abandon. Like Girolamo weirdly has abandonment issues, despite being the one who's kicked everybody out.
Well, that's really, really interesting. Okay. So think about that and how that can be woven in. Again, it's all there, Alex, but you do need another chapter and maybe even two in between these two chapters. And they won't be wasted. And then that will make this chapter not feel so long, because what it's doing is it's carrying the weight of 18 years in it. That's why it feels so long. And it'll give you a chance to make it a little bit more integrated. I think that's what it is. It's a long life. It's a long story. It's a historical novel. It's not a Gothic cathedral, but it's a history of violin making. So, I mean, it is your audience, and it is an expectation that, that these things will be explored. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about it just yet.
Yeah.
Bardsey provides the tools, guidance, and support you need to produce a compelling novel. Our well-researched and thoroughly tested approach includes our minimum complete story, a 90-second exercise designed to keep you on track and foster creativity. The Bardsey Publishability Index, a 23-dimension checklist that offers attainable goals and actionable feedback. And our brand new comprehensive character developer, a fun, interactive tool guaranteed to help you construct unforgettable characters. Come see it for yourself today at bardsey.com. Try our workshop or enter our first chapter contest. Then, when you're ready, Elite membership delivers directed writing groups and personal coaching within a curated community. With Bardsey's help, your work will captivate everyone, from agents to publishers, and most importantly, your readers.